Waterlogged is a horror podcast and contains material not suitable for all audiences. This episode contains discussion of the death of romantic partners and of pets. Full content warnings can be found in the show notes. Listener discretion is advised.
I forgot my umbrella. I forgot my umbrella and the rain has come. Once, you wouldn't see many umbrellas in Seattle. For locals and longtime residents, it was a point of pride. An umbrella? Why would I need an umbrella? Not anymore. You have to understand, Seattle has a lot of gray and drizzly days, but very little hard rain, the way some other regions get. To the point that it's often almost more a mist than a drizzle even, just with a gentle downward trend. And that's the problem. We were eventually told by the city that it started last winter with a trend towards more roadkill. Small animals, rats and squirrels, not even hit as far as they could tell, just dead and rotting on the side of the road. People started finding dead animals in yards and on sidewalks too. But again, nobody really noticed it as a thing. A series of unconnected events. Spring came, and it was just a small, weird thing that most people didn't even know was happening. And we don't get that kind of rain in the summer, so it was the next fall before it started happening again. It still took a while for most people to notice. It was the cats and dogs that did it. People started noticing when it was cats and dogs. Outdoor cats and ferals just started dying. People would find their kitties, apparently unharmed, on the doorstep. Just dead. A little blood running out of their noses and mouths. Small dogs would get let out to do their business in the rain, especially at night, and not come back in. I lost my dog to it, Bernie. A Shih Tzu. I was walking him, and I stopped to pick up a mess he'd made. I realized he'd stopped pulling, realized he was making choking noises. And before I could do anything, he fell down, shook a little, and was just gone. When the dog park started closing, people started getting truly scared. Seattle is a town that loves its puppers. There were the neighborhood and city meetings. There were letters to the editor and screeds stapled to telephone poles. People just absolutely freaked the fuck out. It was wild to watch, even as it was frightening. Dogs as large as Labradors were dying before the first children were seen to be affected. I guess it's because it's not until they're toddler-sized or bigger that they might run loose. And it didn't seem to like to take anything that adults were paying attention to. My neighbor's little girl, I think she was 4, was taken early on. Mom turned her back while Ellie was playing outside just as the rain started. She didn't even hear the little girl choking over the brief conversation she had with the delivery person. She looked around, and Ellie was laying there, motionless. The whole neighborhood mourned, but no one knew what had happened. Eventually, it was older and older children. Eventually, they started closing schools. Eventually, they figured it out, after it was adults. The rain. That misty, barely there rain, and only that kind of rain. It was smothering them, somehow. We still don't understand it exactly what the mechanism is. I don't know if we ever will. But that certain rain, it doesn't stop at faces. It crawls up the nose and down the throat, and squeezes all the air out of your lungs. Just takes over, leaves them bloody and shredded, along with the throat and all the mucous membranes in the mouth and nose. The first well-known person to die was that sex advice columnist. You know who I mean. With his column and his podcast, he was bicycling home from somewhere or other when the rain started. Elevated breathing rates apparently mean it works even faster. Not that it's ever slow. But he barely had time to gasp, according to witnesses. He and his precious bike just fell over. After that, it was a squad of football players at UW who had been running sprints. That misty rain descended and they all went ass over tea kettle from momentum. The video shows that the coach fell only a moment later. That elevated breathing rate again. It was around then that I lost my best friend and my partner, both together. We were all at the park having a last little cookout before the winter swept in, and it was too cold and wet. The clouds closed in and the rain started. I was bent over the grill, and I guess the heat from it protected me or something. I watched them die. I watched them, and it was awful. And then the rain stopped again, at least for a few minutes. And I got to the car and called 911. It was much too late, of course. They thought it was an illness at first. Something like a flesh-eating bacterium. But they couldn't find the little bugger. They couldn't find a transmission vector for it either. Because, of course, there isn't one. There's only the rain. But they didn't know that then. People stayed home as much as possible. Stayed away from each other as much as possible. Because we thought it was a disease we could catch from each other. Not everybody, of course. There are always some assholes. But most people. And a lot of the assholes died, of course. After a while, when nobody outside Western Washington got it, they started to suspect something environmental. That was complicated. They started talking about evacuating, when they had been trying to quarantine us, when the powers that be finally grew sure enough to act on it. The scientists started to figure it out when a group from the CDC who were investigating walked out together for lunch. The two locals were wearing hoodies. The out-of-towners opened umbrellas when the mist and rain started. And within 3 minutes, the locals collapsed. That was their first clue. They thought it was crazy at first. Of course they did. Who wouldn't? But they started to test it. Very, very quietly. With lab rats. And it kept happening. Over and over. Any rat that wasn't covered in some way simply died when that rain started. From there, they tried other animals, and it held. They couldn't exactly do human trials, but they had enough to be pretty sure. As soon as this wild hypothesis was confirmed and announced, a lot of people moved the fuck out of Washington. But a surprising number stayed, because they couldn't afford a move, or because they were too stubborn. We were too stubborn. It's not like I'm not one of those who stayed. It was usually the broke as much as the stubborn, though. The wealthy abandoned their condos and mansions and got out fast. But aid for those of us who couldn't afford to move was rare and hard to get. People eventually figured out that it had to touch your face, your mouth and nose to get you. And so we wrapped up in water-resistant scarves, and we bought those clear umbrellas that come down low past your face. Because it has to be heavy enough to go down for it to kill, and it can't go back up. You need the umbrella in case the scarf slips, and the scarf in case the wind catches the umbrella or you fumble it or whatever. I've got my scarf, but I forgot my umbrella. The rain is starting, and it's getting dark, and this coffee shop is closing. I can't ask for help. I can't. I forgot my umbrella. Fuck!
Hi guys. I'm gonna go a little off script here, so forgive me. We'll get to the credits in a minute. This is our final episode for this season. I want to thank you all so much for the love and support, the reviews, the memes, the kind words. I'm so glad you like our wet little podcast as much as we do. I want to extend huge thanks to everyone on our team, the writers, the actors, the editors, the composer, who all gave their time and their all to this project. Thank you so much. And the biggest thank you to my co-producer, S01E10, without which this show would have been impossible. His boundless enthusiasm and his skill are what made the show happen. Thank you. Now, to wrap things up properly. Umbrellas Over Seattle was written and performed by Rebecca Lynde-Scott. It was directed, edited, and sound designed by Daisy McNamara. It was produced by S01E10 and Daisy McNamara. Our theme song was by Lou Sutcliffe. Follow us on social media at WaterloggedPod. Links are in the show notes. Waterlogged is a production of Eel Song Studios and Law of Names Media.